Hello everyone, I'm back with another video for you today, and I think we all thought that Riot Games had moved on from the card game market with their complete failure that was Legends of Runeterra, where they let down the player base and abandoned all hope of supporting the PvP content in that game. That being said, they have now announced Project K, also known as Riftbound, a physical TCG based on the League of Legends IP. And today, I'm going to be doing a deep dive on how good is this game? Is it worth your time? Is it just a cash grab based on the Runeterra IP? We're going to find all of that out and more today, so stick around, grab yourself a drink if you don't have one already, and let's jump right into the video. So, what exactly is Riftbound? Well, it marks a departure, of course, away from the digital card game focus that Riot Games had with Legends of Runeterra, and instead you're going to be playing a physical card game in real life against an opponent, and you're going to be trying to play units onto the board, use them to conquer battlefields, which you're going to try to hold on to gain points, and eventually getting enough points to win the game. I think it's pretty clear this is a move by Riot to try to capture some of the market share that has been enjoyed by many popular physical card games such as One Piece, TCG, Flesh and Blood, and Lorcana, things like this, which have been very popular recently, and of course making a lot of money for their creators. So I think the move away from the struggling digital card game can be explained by, of course, the motive to make profit. There's nothing inherently wrong with that, but I think if the game's sole purpose is for it to make money, and there's not much passion or creativity or soul in it, then that can certainly be a problem and harm how much enjoyment you can have in the game and just how good the game is in general. And for me, the first problem with Riftbound comes with the art and, in general, the derivative nature of the game. There's a lot of art in this game that has been taken, of course, from League of Legends and from Legends of Runeterra. And I suppose that makes sense when you consider that Riot Games have all of this art and useful content lying around that they're not really using anymore. But something to me about just repackaging old ideas and old art into a new game and trying to sell that at a premium, it just feels a little bit wrong to me. The League of Legends universe is a very large one. There are a lot of different champions and all kinds of aspects to the lore that could be utilized, and I feel like it's very wasted potential to be recycling old cards, old art, old ideas and mechanics even, which is what Riftbound seems to be doing. You know, you've got the typical characters that we're so used to seeing in League of Legends at this point. You've got the Jinx, the Ahri, the Lee Sin, Leona, these kind of characters, sure. But what about some of the more niche characters that we've never really seen represented too well in other League of Legends content? I'm thinking things like Vel'Koz, Azir, I don't know, Singed. How about Rise or some other? I mean, there's a lot of characters you can work with, but instead of going to brand new, fresh ideas, it's relying on the same old concepts of, you know, you've got your Vi, your Jinx, and these popular mainstream characters. I can kind of understand why they want to do that. They want to try to appeal to as large an audience as possible, the people who've watched the Arcane Netflix series, perhaps, and those who've played a lot of League of Legends. But I just think there's a lot of creative potential that's being underutilized, partly due to them wanting to recycle the content of Runeterra, play their greatest hits, essentially. And that's the other thing about this game. I feel like even the gameplay and the mechanics are in some way very derivative, and in some way a greatest hits of card games, you could think of it. For example, we've got archetypes such as the Paladin from Hearthstone. When Hearthstone first released, you've got Victor in Riftbound, who plays a lot of tokens onto the board, these 1-power tokens that you're then buffing up with your other cards and sacrificing in order to gain certain benefits. It wouldn't be a problem if there were maybe 1 or 2 derivative archetypes in Riftbound, but I feel like a large portion of the game actually will end up being somewhat derivative. You know, you have buffing archetypes, which were thing in Legends of Runeterra. We have movement, which I could arguably see being in some way copied from Marvel Snap to some extent. You've got discard archetype, which in Legends of Runeterra was a very popular way to play an aggro deck with these sort of discarding synergies. And a lot of that just feels straight ripped from Legends of Runeterra. So in some way, I do feel like the mechanics within this game are in some ways creatively bankrupt, and I think that could harm the game. At least it, to me, makes it seem like there's not much soul and creativity put into this project. I think it's even arguable that the card art in general is in some way inspired or a little bit ripping off something like One Piece TCG with your big, you know, characters in frame, certain aspects of how the cards are working, but that's, you know, a bit more of a niche critique, shall we say. Beyond just all this derivative creative bankruptcy, I suppose we could say, the lack of passion and soul in some of these mechanics and in the ripping of card art from previous games, which personally to me feels like quite cash grabby. Beyond that, I have some core issues with the game in general. The win condition for the game is very unintuitive. It's obtuse, it's difficult to understand. Even for someone like me that's been playing card games for much of my life, you are essentially having to score a certain number of points by conquering the battlefields or by holding on to them, not letting your opponent take them away from you, which on its surface is straightforward enough. But then you factor in that once you are trying to get the final victory point that you need, you have to meet a certain condition where you're either holding on to both battlefields or essentially conquering them in the same turn. And this can lead to some very unintuitive game states. It's not very easy to simply understand how you're supposed to win the game or how your opponent might be able to win on their subsequent turn. And I think this could lead new players into quite some frustrating situations, and in fact, I've been dealing with that and not quite knowing exactly how I'm supposed to win, or, oh, is the opponent winning in this scenario? Not quite, but well, why not? For this reason? Okay, you know, it's just not very clear in the way that a Flesh and Blood might be, where you're just simply trying to kill your opponent and take their health total to 0, or the same can be said with Hearthstone, Magic, etc. I think there is some real value in the simplicity and intuitiveness that most card games operate under. So for me, that's a really huge problem with the game. I think Lorcana was the first card game in recent memory to try to take a bit more of a different approach to how you win the game. In terms of its questing, you're trying to get to a certain number of points by your units doing a quest on their turn. It's a little bit abstract, and I think Riftbound is trying to do something similar, but it just is even more counterintuitive and obtuse, and I think that is going to harm the game in the long run. You know, it's like if I'm playing Counter-Strike, I want to understand how the game works, right? It's like you go plant the bomb if you're the terrorists, you defuse the bomb if you're the counter-terrorist, you try to kill the enemy team. Okay, straightforward, it makes sense. I don't want the game to explain, oh, you have to plant the bomb, but then you have to run through this corridor, and you have to be backed up by 2 teammates, and the opponents can then shoot at you, but if you shoot back at them and you kill them, then you can win the game. Like, it's just too many rules. It doesn't make sense. I just want to be able to play the game. Okay, I plant the bomb, I win. I defuse the bomb, I lose, etc. I think the same can be said for card games. You would like it to be intuitive and simple and make a lot of sense, and just when you're playing Riftbound, especially for the first few times, it just doesn't make sense. It's just weird, and it's like, okay, I'm used to these other things, and you know, you could argue that perhaps that's just a not being used to these kind of more complicated win conditions in a card game, but I just do think it's doing the game a disservice and hasn't been very well thought through. It's the kind of solution to a problem. You know, they're probably having issues with aggro decks being very powerful, so you're able to quickly rush down your opponent with a deck, and they think, how do we stop this being too strong? Well, we need you to sort of be having to take 2 locations at once to balance it, but it's just not a very clean solution, and it just, to me, seems like they haven't put that much care and attention into the actual mechanics of this game. The gameplay is also very swingy, and I don't know that it just feels intuitive to play in general. You know, this whole system with the battlefields, it could be good. It's got some kind of flair to it. The idea that you could put a certain battlefield into your deck that would help you and not so much your opponent, and maybe some that battlefields that seem good for your deck actually wouldn't be, and there's some quite interesting deck building ideas that could be built upon there. But I do think the core mechanics of the game are leading to issues in the game that just feel very strange. For example, you're able to sort of attack a battlefield with your units, but there's sort of no limit on how often you can do that in a particular round, so you could just attack with one unit and then attack again with another, and it feels a bit unintuitive and bizarre. That was again another thing to me that just I didn't twig at the beginning when I was first playing. It's like, oh, actually I could attack with this guy and then I can attack later. Why not attack with everything? Well, then my guys might die in a way that I don't want them to. This kind of thing. So there's just some real kind of core issues with the game design, I think, that make it feel bizarre to play and not that gripping and rewarding in the same way that the more intuitive physical card games like a Star Wars Unlimited or a Flesh and Blood, where they can just grip you and hook you because you know what you're doing the thing, it's going well or it's going poorly, and you want to just keep going and keep going. With this Riftbound, I think it just ends up feeling counterintuitive and confusing, and like you're not really sure what exactly you're supposed to be doing or what the best course of action is. I can say the main bright spot for me in this sea of concerns and difficulties with Riftbound is the mana system. I really like the mana system where you're getting 2 runes onto your board each turn, which allows you quite a huge amount of mana ramping. You're able to play very powerful cards after only a few turns in the game. However, you're able to juice up the power of your cards by sending back those mana runes into the rune deck. So you're essentially able to trade off your scaling and your big future power in order to play a very concentrated amount of powerful cards in an earlier turn. I really like that push and pull of, ooh, do I try to get a bit more mana for my future turns, or do I just go now and blitz the opponent and try to mess them up in this particular turn? It makes every deck feel a little bit like a ramp deck, and I think that's one of the more enjoyable aspects to card games, is when you're ramping up and becoming stronger and feeling like you're really playing some powerful stuff. So I do like the mana system, and that is one shining light in Riftbound, but I'm not sure it's enough to really make this game stand out. It's kind of like building a really shitty car and then just putting a cool engine into it. You know, it doesn't suddenly make the car really amazing or look really good, right? It's just underlying mechanic that is strong, but overall the car's a bit of a mess. And I think you just got to look to the other moves that Riot Games has made in recent times, you know, things like charging huge amounts of money for skins in League of Legends. You've got gacha systems in order to be able to acquire super rare skins. It just feels to me a little bit milking of the player base. I think you've had them say themselves that Runeterra was no longer supported because it was not bringing in enough money, or perhaps no money at all.
We were always spending a lot more money investing in the game and supporting the community than the game was bringing in.
And clearly, to me, that is why they are then pursuing the oversaturated physical TCG niche, because collectors are willing to pay a lot to unbox cards. You know, you get people addicted to the dopamine of opening these packs up. To me, it just feels like it leaves a bit of a sour taste in my mouth, and I feel like I really ought to call it out for what it is, because I know a lot of people are very into League of Legends and the IP, and they're just gonna want to jump right into this game. They're gonna take the bait, hook, line, and sinker, but I think it's worth pointing out that it's hard to say whether it's predatory or not, but it is, to me, a cash grab and just not a good look. And so I suppose the closing thoughts I have about this game is it's just very derivative. There's nothing particularly new about it. Yes, you've got these battlefields, but that in some way is just aping Marvel Snap and these kind of things where you're thinking about putting a lot of power into one location. Do you overcommit or not? Yeah, I mean, these are things we've seen before. There's nothing completely innovative about this, really. It's all just derivative mishmash, a bunch of card game concepts thrown into one, trying to make it feel maybe like a digital card game, but in physical format, and attaching that League of Legends IP, hoping to just get the whales to be buying those cards, opening up packs, and I think it will work to some extent. You know, you've got a lot of people that love the brand, love the IP, and they are going to get some fun from this game. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying it's the worst game in the world. In fact, there are some highlights to it. There are some good aspects to Riftbound, but I think overall the general vibe I'm getting from this is lacking soul, lacking passion, and just a way to milk the player base, the League of Legends fandom, for a bit more money, and even the card game enthusiasts like myself who might be tempted to dip their feet into this project. So overall, if you're a real League of Legends fanatic and you did enjoy Runeterra and you don't feel let down by Riot Games or that they're going to abuse you in the future in some way when it comes to their pricing or their tournaments or anything like that, if you feel like taking the plunge and playing a physical card game with your friends, then maybe this game could be for you. It can be enjoyable, I'm sure, but as I've said, it's quite unintuitive, it feels very derivative, and to me, it feels like a cash grab. So I'm not going to be investing my time or money into this game, and I thought I'd let you know the honest truth about how I feel about it. If you would like some alternative TCG, physical TCG recommendations, then I have done a tier list recently on my channel, so go and check that out. With that being said, I hope this video will be of value to you, I hope you've enjoyed, and I'll see you next time. Bye bye.